Welcome to this introductory series on Vedic Astrology. My name is Ryan Kurzak. I'm an author, astrologer, and teacher. I've been studying astrology beginning around 2000, 2002, once I got involved in yoga and meditation. And I've been practicing professionally beginning in 2005. I've written a book on Vedic Astrology, The Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, with Richard Fish, who is one of my teachers. And I decided to do this series of lectures going over the foundational principles of Vedic astrology so that we can make sure that we're all on the same page when we're learning astrology. I have planned a series of 52 talks. This is one of them, so this is one out of 52. Going over what is astrology, how does it work, going over the basics of the planets, understanding what the planets mean, what they represent, the houses in detail, also the signs and the ascendants. We're going to spend some time looking at the karakas, the different aspects, the rashi aspects, the graha aspects. We're going to look at some yogas, and then eventually we'll get into the vargas and the dasha systems, which allows us to predict and understand how the promise of our life is going to develop based on the dashas or the time cycles that Vedic astrology has. We'll also look at transits because those things go together, the transits and the dashas. But this first video, I just want to address the basic fundamental thought in regards to what is astrology and how does it work. Now, this is my understanding and my interpretation. I think a lot of people probably share this, but really, astrology is such a mystical thing in that we don't fully grasp how it works, or what the mechanism is. We can imagine, and we can theorize, and that's where we're going to start. So basically, astrology is a study of the motions of the planets through our solar system, and how those energies, or how those motions, affect our physical lives. Over thousands of years, people have paid attention to this and have seen that when certain planets move through houses and signs, when they make certain conjunctions and yogas, aspects, that events tend to occur, situations tend to come about. And over time of seeing that, a system was formed to be able to anticipate, well, what might the future be like for us as a civilization, for us as individuals. Now, how does it work, though? That's the question. We're going to use the term magnetism. I'm not so sure that magnetism is exactly the right word for this, but it gives you the right idea. When we think of magnetism, there is a push and a pull between two bodies, two physical bodies. Sometimes you're drawn into situations. That's when you are being magnetically pulled towards something. Sometimes you're repulsed, you're pushed away. And the astrological chart shows the collection of habits and tendencies, those desires, those cravings, and also those fears and those repulsions that draw us into certain situations, draw us to certain people, and push us away from certain situations. So you might notice that maybe you yourself have great relationships. You always seem to pick the right person. You have a good time with relationships. But your friend or other people that you know, they always get in terrible relationships, or there's always some sort of drama or difficulty with the relationships. Or similarly with finances and money. You might not worry about money. You always pay your bills on time, works out effortlessly. But yet your friend or your sister or your peers are always complaining about not having enough money and getting themselves into trouble. Now, what's the difference there? The difference is that we were born at certain times that reflect our past habits, tendencies, and thoughts. And the planets, they are the gateways or the transmitters of certain karmas. They're actually aspects of our own consciousness, so they're not different from us. But when they get in certain positions, they cause or give the probability, the trend for something to occur. And it's because of, well, again, we'll use the term magnetism or gravity, that moves us, influences us. In Vedic astrology, the planets are called grahas, which means seizers. So they seize our consciousness and push us in a certain direction. So astrology is essentially the study of the movement of these heavenly bodies and how they affect us internally, causing us to experience things seemingly externally. When we're born, we have a certain pattern. That's our birth chart, our horoscope. That birth chart shows the habits and the tendencies, as I mentioned before. So let's pretend that in your past 5 lifetimes, you've been very good at managing business, at taking care of the affairs of business and trade, which means in this lifetime, you're going to be born with a planetary combination that gives that kind of result, gives success in that area. Let's say in past lifetimes, you haven't made any effort towards picking good supportive relationships. And so you always seem to have friends or peers or coworkers that cause you problems. Why? Because in these past lifetimes, you haven't chosen to use your will to think differently, to act differently, to say, I don't want that in my consciousness. And then choose, I do want supportive and helpful people in my consciousness. You haven't done that. And so in this lifetime, you'll look at the birth chart, and you'll see planetary combinations that give difficulty in that area of life. So in one way, this is liberating. In another way, it can be a little bit frustrating. It's liberating in the sense that if you can learn to read your chart and understand what's going on in your life, see the difficulties, then you can see that that is based on your past influences, which means that in the present, even though you still might be experiencing the karma of those past influences, the result of those past influences, if you choose to think differently, to act differently, to put your attention to what you want to experience, it's not going to happen immediately, but you've already started the process. And that means that in future incarnations, if you stick with it, if you maintain, if you create this new habit, then your next birth chart will reflect that change. And we'll get into this more specifically when we talk about the Baladi of Ashtas and the state of karmic fruition, how all that works. But the point is that the birth chart is a snapshot of your past choices, habits, and tendencies. You can choose to let those tendencies express, or you can do something different. You can try to think differently, act differently. And it's hard, and it's not easy, because we find comfort in the things that we are used to. Just like you might know people who are in abusive relationships, and they never get out of the abusive relationships. Why? Because they're comfortable in that way, to a degree, until the time comes when they're no longer comfortable, and it makes more sense for them to change, to choose a different relationship. And in that case, we can see that a karma has been burnt out, and now they have the freedom to choose something different. So this is just an idea of how astrology works. And this is one of the reasons why, personally, I don't think it's that great of an idea to do mundane or worldly astrology. And by that I mean doing the kind of astrology where you say Saturn and Mars and the Moon are now in Scorpio. So this is what the planet's going to experience. It doesn't really work that way. Maybe to a degree on a general level, but what I found is that if you don't have the planets in your birth chart, in your inner cosmos, reflecting those experiences, it's not going to affect you. Whereas if you do have tendencies that are indicated by that kind of combination of planets, then it will affect you. If we know someone has a karmic predisposition towards being in car accidents, and we see that by the planetary transits, a car accident is going to occur, more than likely, we can say that they need to be careful because they've got that tendency, that predisposition, and when the sky is ripe, when the season is ripe, well, they need to watch that. But if we see someone who doesn't have a predisposition towards car accidents at all, they've never been in a car accident in their life, and we're looking at the birth chart and the transits, and it indicates something of that nature, you might not have to pay too much attention to it because they don't have it within them. So everything that we experience can only come about if we already have that possibility within ourselves. And that's what the birth chart reflects. It shows what are the possibilities, what are the tendencies that are innate to us, good or bad. Then when we look at the dashas, when we look at the transits, if those tendencies have the opportunity to express, we need to be aware of that. We need to pay attention to it. And that's when we'll advise remedial measures, or we'll encourage people to take some sort of action to prevent that. It's very similar to, if someone is an alcoholic. If you put them in a bar, or you put them in a situation where there's alcohol, well, they've already got the predisposition to drink too much. So putting them in that situation is just going to exacerbate it and probably cause it to happen. Whereas if you have someone who can have a drink, a glass of wine, it doesn't bother them, and they don't fall into an alcoholic state, well, they can go into a bar, or they can go to a place where people are drinking, and it's not an issue. So this is how we can look at it. Now, we have an inner cosmos and we have an outer cosmos. The inner cosmos is represented by our chakras. Each planet rules a certain chakra. For example, first chakra is Saturn, second chakra is Jupiter, third chakra is Mars, fourth chakra is Venus, fifth chakra is Mercury, sixth chakra is the sun and the moon. Right side is the sun, left side is the moon. And there is no planetary correlation to the seventh chakra, because that is beyond karma. That is beyond these kinds of planetary influences. So knowing this, one of the best things that we can do is begin to practice meditation, yoga, something that brings us into conscious awareness of the energies within our inner cosmos. When we practice meditation clearly and effectively, we're able to see what's going on within us. And by getting detachment, by getting distance, we can choose whether or not we want to actually engage those patterns. So it's always about bringing it back to the present and making a conscious decision. But it's also about having patience, because as we mentioned earlier, certain things are going to come to pass because we've already put them into motion. It's just like if you're driving down the road, you've put so much momentum by stepping on the gas pedal of your car that you're going 70 miles an hour. Now, if you take your foot off the gas and just let it go, eventually that car will slow down and stop. But there's already that momentum. That's your past karma. So by coming into the present and practicing detachment, that's like taking your foot off the brake. So eventually that car is going to stop. And then if you want to go in a different direction, you turn the wheel, go in a different direction. That's our conscious choice. With remedial measures, that allows us to put the brakes on. So we can also let the car slow down of its own accord, but we have ways of putting the brakes on certain karmas. But that doesn't mean you're going to come to an instantaneous stop. That's going to start putting the direction of the force opposite of where you were going. So always remember, your birth chart reflects where you've been, what you've been doing. You have a choice. From the time you were born until now, you are either unconscious or making choices that support those things, support the way the planets are pushing you around, or you've become more aware of it, and you're starting to see that you can make other choices while you let your past momentum exhaust itself. So this is the beauty of Vedic astrology. And in time, the more you contemplate it, the more you study, the more you analyze the planets and the houses, and you look at your chart and other people's charts and see how the transits work, how the dashas work, you start to get a sense of what exactly is going on within astrology. So this is something, some kind of contemplation that you practice for yourself, and you get an inner knowing, an inner response. So you figure out how does astrology work for yourself. I don't think that our minds, our brains at this time, our nervous system, can fully grasp the immensity of what's going on when we're looking at astrology. The simple fact that we are only in the beginning of the Dwapara Yuga, that shows that we're just beginning to see the potential of astrology. It's been practiced for thousands of years through the Kali Yuga, the Dark Ages, and people did some good astrology, but just like any science, it's starting to evolve. We're starting to realize mistakes. We're starting to see the potential benefit. We're also starting to get into the mathematics of it, the specific mathematics of it as it was meant to be practiced. And as the yugas go by, thousands of years from now, we will have a very good understanding, knowledge of astrology. But then the funny thing is we probably won't need it, because as the yugas go by, we naturally become more enlightened, more aware, and we're not so desirous of predictions, or our self-understanding comes naturally without looking at planets and things. So it's an interesting process. One thing that is advised is to begin a meditation practice, because that'll help to clarify your awareness and allow you to see how to study astrology clearly, how to really engage your consciousness to start thinking in a way which is a little more abstract to a degree, astrologically speaking. And even beyond that, once you get into the math, if you learn how to meditate, it'll allow you to understand those mathematical principles much easier. But in this series, we're not going to get too much into the math. We're just going over the basic principles so that when you look at a chart, you can get a general idea of what the planets mean, what the houses mean, what is the promise of this person's life. You understand yourself better, you can help others understand themselves better, and hopefully it can bring us into more harmony within our purpose and our path in life, and more harmony within the world. So next talk, we'll be looking at astrology's role as a Vedic science, and how it can show us our particular path in life.